So I've been playing Elden Ring for over a year now since the game first launched, but only with the release of my YouTube channel did I start doing cosplay builds, where I try to take various characters and fashion builds for a spin, making improvements along the way. But while doing cosplay builds is super fun and a great way to play the game in both PvE and PvP, there are numerous issues that have persisted since the game's launch. I'm sure we've all seen an example of this in action, a player running around with full bull goat's armor, power stancing halberds, quick stepping like a ninja. But why would a player do this? Well, it's because they want to win. And you might say to yourself, well, surely this is fine. The equipment is in the game and it's fair to use, provided you can distribute your stats to make it work. And I completely agree. I've enjoyed my days of using the Rivers of Blood or the Moonveil to destroy my enemies, teabagging them afterwards for losing to my OP build. This video is definitely not a criticism of people using powerful builds, but rather a rant about From Software incentivizing this kind of behaviour. Because the problem that I have is that cosplaying in this game is actually counterproductive. Whether you're limiting the equipment you use to that of a character in the game, or trying to use some of the various great looking fashion pieces, you'll oftentimes be putting yourself at a major disadvantage. And in this video, I'll be exploring those reasons so we can understand how Elden Ring rewards ugliness, mostly from a PvP perspective, as that's where the issue mostly rears its ugly head. But enough monologuing, like the video, and give it to me bite-sized. So let's start off with the issue of hyper armor and poise, as this is one of the most notable sticking points when running any build. Hyper armor is a mechanic in the game which makes your attacks immune to interruption for a timed window during an animation, making it difficult for you to be staggered out of that attack and being placed into a vulnerable position. This is similar to poise, but different in the sense that it only applies when attacking with certain kinds of weapons, such as greatswords or colossal swords, although some smaller weapons do have hyper armor, but this could be seen as a balancing issue rather than something consistent across that weapon class. Then we have poise, which is a value derived directly from your armor, and it determines how easily you are staggered from attacks. Armors with high poise values would increase your poise to a higher level, meaning you can avoid being staggered far more and from far larger weapons. While armors with less poise will have the opposite effect, likely resulting in you being staggered from a single strike with a smaller weapon. It's important to understand how those two mechanics work, because the way in which Elden Ring rewards ugliness is through the way poise is distributed amongst the armor, namely a select few at the top of the food chain, which come with the highest poise values in the game, but look ugly as hell. For example, take the bull goat's armor, which will provide you with a whopping 100 poise for the entire set, which is the highest value in the game without talismans, but comes with these protruding horns which often clip through the weapon you are holding, or at best, look impractical to carry around. You also have the fire prelate armor, which comes with very high poise values alongside the omen armor, lionel's armor, malformed dragon armor, and even the beast champion's armor, which all have very high poise and defense values, but don't really look that good. Now this can be somewhat circumvented by only using select pieces from these sets in combination with other pieces of armor to make a build which looks far better, while gaining some benefits from the heavier armor sets. But this often requires a lot of compromise to make it work, and is far inferior from a numbers perspective compared to just using the stronger set in its entirety and calling it a day. This can result in players being rewarded for using the strongest gear, and often being put at a disadvantage if they experiment with different pieces of armor, even if it looks better but is slightly weaker. Now this issue of poise can be fixed with hyper armor, which involves using larger and heavier weapons to trade attacks with enemies, and letting the hyper armor shield you from a stagger. But not all builds use super heavy weapons, and if you're facing against a player that strikes fast, you might get staggered before your weapon even begins to swing. For example, I'm currently working on my Glaive Master Hodir build, which uses a variety of rather light armor pieces, as these tend to be the best looking in the game, giving me a whopping 35 poise, which is practically useless. Getting hit will stagger me, which means I have to compromise by using passive healing over time, ritual talismans to boost my attack and defense, and of course just getting good at the game, which many players won't do, resulting in them taking the path of least resistance, aka heavy armor, which rewards ugliness. And overall, this means seeing a lot less experimental builds being used, which are oftentimes the most fun to fight against, as it involves using equipment that's unpopular, underpowered, and adds a breath of fresh air to the game. And this issue could probably be improved with a few tweaks. You can bump up the poise of weaker armor sets, so when used in conjunction with the bull goat's talisman, which boosts your poise by 33%, it closes that gap between lighter and heavier sets just a little bit more. You could also make the weaker sets even lighter to allow light rolling, which one could argue is even stronger than Poise. But I think a solution, which could be solved in the upcoming DLC, is by adding more drip and ELDEN bling into the game with decent Poise values, which don't have as much branding on the armour, which is something I'll dive into later in this video. But next, let's talk about the special effects received from certain pieces of equipment, because this is something that was explored in Bloodborne, but never carried over into Elden Ring, which is a shame, because the feature could help address this problem. Many of the status boosting armors in the game are ugly as sin: glintstone crowns, imp heads, scarabs, silver tier mask, and other pieces of equipment which provide you with some kind of bonus, or just ugh. Now this isn't all of them, but some of the more useful ones are definitely guilty of this crime. And I really don't see why you couldn't transfer the effect of these armors into a piece of your choice, as they're not game breaking and there are often indicators as to what buff the player has on through their glow and other visual effects. This could even extend to weapons to expand the kind of builds you can make, while allowing you to utilize a fashion style that works for you. For example, taking the passive boost to our raw attacks from the Highland Axe and placing it on the Great Axe, freeing up a slot for an alternative weapon while not impacting your overall equip load. Bloodborne had blood gems which you could place on weapons to provide you with effects like bonus attack power or even bonus status build up, and these could be swapped out at will, or better versions found from the various dungeons. I'm not sure why Elden Ring didn't continue this trend, as it could have added some much needed utility to those dungeons and catacombs, which are mostly duplicates and don't really add much value at this point outside of grabbing a piece of equipment you need for your build. And this could likely be solved with some form of transmog. I'm not saying that you should be allowed to swap the Poise values on equipment or completely alter an equipment's look to the point where it's unrecognisable from the original, but at least allow us some flexibility to customise without being penalised for doing so. The consequence of not addressing this is players running around with helmets that don't match their gear at all, or provide a bonus effect that optimises their chance for success and thus rewarding ugliness. But the final point I wanted to dive into is the game's very disappointing alter garment mechanic and armour branding, as this is something that the developers could likely fix very quickly with very minor adjustments to the game's overall balancing. Alter garments is a mechanic that allows you to alter the look of a piece of equipment, which sounds fantastic on paper. But for some reason, most pieces of armour only allow you to remove the cape, which is a slap in the face to drip dribblers who are hungry for some wider customization options. Also, for some reason, altering a piece of equipment often reduces the overall defense and poise, again, punishing you for even making that adjustment. Some of the nicest armor pieces I've found have come from altering them, and this is how you often spice up a very limited pool of equipment to make it viable and full of bling. But there's a major missed opportunity outside of being able to change the colours of armor, which is the ability to remove branding. There are some armor pieces which are unique to a certain NPC you get them from. For example, the horns on Dragos' armor, the eyes on Sir Gideon Ofnir's armor, and the sigils on the knight pieces. But there's a major problem in the sense that you can't really use these armor pieces to make your own original look, because you have these leftover indicators of what that armor piece is associated with, and I'll use an analogy to explain this. I used to work in a store called Uniqlo, that's known for selling non-branded clothing items, alongside clothing that claims to give you eye roll buffs, but that's besides the point. I love shopping here, and still do, because there's nothing worse than walking around with a big ass Nike, Adidas or logo slapped across your chest. Fashion for me is about the look, the colours, the texture, the shape, and how it all comes together, not where you get your pieces from. And unfortunately, I just can't match Sir Gideon Ofnir's multiple eyeballs on his chest piece with anything else, as it looks weird when put together. That's like wearing a jumper from Adidas with a tracksuit from Nike and shoes from Greg's. It doesn't really fit together. Having the ability to remove a giant's face from a piece of armor would work wonders for pairing this with other pieces of equipment, expanding the range of options. This also extends to the knight set. Let me remove the fireplace decoration and the tree banding from my set so I can cosplay as a paladin. Provide me with more variations of the same armor set so I can have some options to choose from. Failing to do so results in players not using the alter garments option at all, or looking ugly because they can't optimize their set to suit the look of their weapons or cosplay, and thus rewarding ugliness. But to wrap up this video, there are a number of problems with trying to be fashionable in Elden Ring, and I think while some of these are quick fixes, other solutions may need longer consideration to implement effectively. With the announcement of DLC, I'm hoping From Software can put some attention on the fashion and cosplaying community who like to use equipment based on looks rather than stats, to give them a much needed boost, in combination with balancing the game so you can play effectively no matter your fashion. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and of course subscribe. This is Bite Sized Otaku, and I hope you enjoyed.